All right, let's dive right into this explainer and tackle a moment that literally every ceramicist knows intimately. You've done the hard work, you've waited out the firing schedule, and now you are finally opening the kiln. But instead of perfection, you find your piece has been compromised. Well, today is all about practical application. We're building a hands-on, highly practical troubleshooting guide right for your studio. You open the kiln with expectation. The piece is there, but something is not right. Man, it is absolutely heartbreaking to discover fissures, bare spots, or flaking on a piece you've poured hours into. So today, we're going to treat your studio exactly like an emergency room. You're the attending physician, and we're going to learn exactly how to visually diagnose these defects during your inspection, and more importantly, how to apply the rapid treatments needed to fix them. Here is our triage list for today, enumerated strictly by order of severity. 1. Maximum danger, shivering. 2. Functional risk, cracklet. 3. Surface chaos, bubbles and crawling. 4. Common annoyance, pinholes. And 5. Intentional defects. Let's get right into our most critical cases. Section 1. Maximum danger, shivering. During your initial visual inspection of a fired piece, here is exactly what you need to look out for. If you see tiny, razor-sharp pieces of glaze detaching from the clay, especially around high-tension areas like your edges, rims, and handles, you've got shivering. And this isn't just a minor aesthetic flaw. It's a massive hazard, because those sharp little flakes can easily pop off right into someone's food or drink. The underlying physics here all come down to compression. Basically, shivering happens when the glaze is physically just too large for the clay body underneath it. Because it doesn't fit, the glaze sits under excessive compression. And if you're working with a delicate body, say porcelain, this immense tension can actually snap the entire piece right in half instead of just flaking the glaze off. To relieve that compression, you've got to increase the thermal expansion of the glaze. As a quick fix, you can adjust your glaze recipe by adding alkaline feldspars, specifically sodium feldspar, or you can introduce nepheline cyanide. This balances out the fit so the glaze and the clay can actually coexist peacefully. Section 2. Functional risk, cracklet. Now, cracklet, which you might know as crazing, is the exact mechanical opposite of shivering. Remember how shivering means the glaze is too big? Well, with cracklet, the glaze actually shrinks way more than the clay upon cooling. So instead of being squeezed under compression, the glaze is being stretched incredibly thin and it fractures under immense tension. Visually diagnosing this one is usually pretty straightforward. You're going to see a delicate spiderweb-like network of fissures cracking all across the surface of the glaze. The glaze is literally tearing itself apart to relieve that stretching tension. And while it might look kind of pretty, it's a major functional risk for dinnerware. Those tiny fissures, they can harbor bacteria over time and allow liquids to slowly seep right into the ceramic body. So to quickly solve crazing, you need to do the exact inverse of what we did for shivering. You have to reduce the expansion of the glaze. You can easily do this in the studio by adding more silica, like flint, or by adding more alumina via clay. You definitely want to reduce high expansion fluxes like sodium and potassium too. Or, if you want a purely procedural fix, simply run a much slower cooling process in your kiln, or try firing at a slightly higher temperature to let everything settle. Section 3. Surface chaos, bubbles, and crawling. Dropping further down our triage list, we're leaving functional danger behind and entering pure surface chaos. If you open the kiln and your glaze looks like it's been boiling, leaving behind rough craters and blisters, your quick fix is to apply much thinner layers of glaze next time and slow down your cooling cycle to give those bubbles time to heal. But if your glaze is retracting into isolated islands with bare clay peeking through, that's crawling. Your quickest remedy there is to calcine your zinc before mixing, or just reapply the problem glaze over a base glaze that you already know adheres well. You know, crawling is actually fascinating from a chemical standpoint. It happens because the glaze literally cracks during the drying phase, before it even gets hot. Then, when it melts in the kiln, high surface tension aggressively pulls it back into those islands. The source perfectly compares this to water beating up on a greasy surface. And this is often caused by an excess of specific fluxes in your recipe, particularly zinc and magnesium, which just dramatically crank up that surface tension. Section 4. Common annoyance, pinholes. We've now reached the very bottom of our severity list. This defect is structurally safe, it won't ruin the food safety of your piece, but it is undoubtedly the most frequent and aesthetically frustrating fault out there. When inspecting under good lighting, you'll spot microscopic holes dotting the glazed surface that stubbornly refuse to close up during the melt. They're actually tiny escape tunnels. They're caused by gases pushing their way out of the clay body during the firing process, which usually comes from minuscule organic particles, like trapped carbon, burning off. Fortunately, we have some great practical steps to eliminate them. Your absolute quickest fix, especially if you're working at lower temperatures, is to ensure your initial bisque firing is 2 full cones hotter than your final glaze firing. That burns off the organics before you even apply the glaze. If that's not possible, extend your firing cycle by adding a 15-minute soak at your peak temperature. This holds the glaze in a liquid state a little longer, allowing all those trapped gases to escape completely so the holes can heal over nice and smooth. Applying thinner glaze or cooling slower helps a lot too. Section 5. Intentional defects. When error becomes art. So we've spent this entire explainer treating these issues as absolute emergencies that you have to triage and fix immediately. But I want to pause and ask you something. What if these unpredictable chemical reactions are exactly what you want to achieve? Because it turns out, context is everything. Many master ceramists actively utilize a controlled craquelette, highly textured soft crawling, or the organic feel of small bubbles as deliberate, sought-after decorative elements. Now, sure, this is generally reserved for sculptural or non-functional wear, but visually, these physical traits can be incredibly beautiful when you apply them with real intention. As our source highlights, the same mechanism that creates the problem can, with control, create an effect. It all comes down to mastering your materials. So my final question for you as you head back into the studio is this. Are you going to let the kiln blindly dictate your results, or will you use this scientific troubleshooting guide to master the elements, tame the chemistry, and maybe even transform a frustrating defect into your signature style? The choice and the control is totally in your hands.